Friends, family, welcome back. I'm Jaquel,
And I'm John.
and this is Melanated Truth. So today we're going to take a bit of a pause from the Torah talks and talk about something a little different. So if you remember on our first two videos, we shared a testimony of how we left America and came to Tanzania. If you haven't checked those out, please do. Um, and in those videos, John talked about how he went through this extended process of extended time doing research before coming to believe that we are the people of the book. And while he was doing that research, he actually really didn't share a lot with me during that time. But there was that one day when he came home and he said, Jaquel, I've done the research and I really believe this is true. I really believe we're the people of the book. And, that really scared me. My I got a little queasy about it because if this is true, I knew that it would change everything. It would change the course of our entire lives. Hence us being in Tanzania right now. So today, what we're going to talk about is epistemology. Epistemology from the dictionary is the theory of knowledge, especially with regards to its methods, validity, and scope, and the distinction between justified belief and opinion. I'm going to repeat that. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge, especially with regards to its methodology, validity, and scope, and the distinction between justified belief versus opinion.
So let me just say real quick, the big difference is, and to boil it all down, some people have opinions and some people have justified belief. How do you know, whatever it is you believe,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know that your belief it has something to justify it,
Mm-hmm.
or is it just an opinion that you've come up to? And that's what
Right.
really what we're talking about, how to have a solid foundation for
Yeah.
these
And
things.
so, John being a theologian, I'd say, and his research process was a lot different than mine. But we came to the same conclusion. And so today we're going to talk about what that process was like. How do we how do we know that what we believe is actually true? And we're hoping that in sharing our stories and in sharing how we came to these conclusions, it will help you to determine for yourselves how do you do your own research? How do you allow the Holy Spirit to guide you in doing that research? And how do you, without fear and without opinions from other people and without all these other emotional things, how do you build a foundation of truth for yourself and for your family? So, John, I wanted to ask when, so being in the ministry, you have been in ministry for 10 plus years, back in 2020.
It was
Um,
almost 15, I think.
Really? Yeah, yeah.
Close
It
to
had been a
15.
long time.
Mm-hmm.
And in your time in ministry, you have interacted with Hebrew Israelites before. So when you had this conversation back in 2020 with this church member that you were meeting with, this was not the first time you had heard the claim,
Mm-hmm.
but this was the first time you said, okay, I'm not just going to go off of what I've been told to believe about his Hebrew Israelites. I'm going to look into the claim myself.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah. So um, I think the first time that I'd ever heard anybody say that we were the people of the book was 2012. The college ministry that I was involved in, they did a summer program, and I did a bunch of them. Oh no, not 2012. It might have been 2009.
Oh, wow.
Because the college ministry that I was a part of when I was in college, we did this thing where we went to the beach every summer, and the first time that I came back, my dad was asking me what I had learned, and he was trying to be supportive, and that summer, the Most High was just dealing with a lot of my sinfulness. So I came back
Mm-hmm.
and I told him, I'm just, these things I was learning about sin nature and who we are and all these kind of things. And he was like, well, we the people of the book. Like his
Mm,
response to whatever I had learned that summer was, we're the people of the book. And I'm like, what the heck does he? I don't even know what he's talking about. And I know what he's trying to say, but he doesn't even know what he's trying. This
mm-hmm.
is what I'm processing in my head. Like he has no
Mm-hmm.
idea what he's even saying. And I
Mm-hmm.
just mapped it off. And then it was almost like clockwork. Once every year or 2 years, he would just kind of randomly sprinkle that into conversations. And I'm like, I've never seen my dad open up a Bible up to this point in my
Yeah.
life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how could he possibly? He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not that he's crazy, but from the from the very
Mm,
first times I was introduced to this idea, I put it in it was very easy to categorize. Black people have been mistreated, especially in
yeah.
America, and they're searching for an identity that will give them significance and
Mhm.
that would, in some kind of way, go to. It's we've been so seen and so treated as inferior. Wouldn't this be the ultimate identity to take to show superiority or some? That's the kind
Mhm.
of category that I put it in. So I had an aunt that would tell me from time to time. My dad was the first one to say something to me. Um, and then when I was living in Augusta, I was on my front porch reading my Bible, and this guy rides by, black dude rides by in like a dirty wife beater and some baby blue basketball shorts, riding like an old bike. And he turns and looks at me, and it's kind of has like a mean face. And he says, "Hey," he says, "we are the people of the book." No, no, no. He didn't say that. He said, we are, he said, "You are the Jew that the Bible speaks of."
Yeah.
And I kind of, and it so stunned me. It was like I got punched in the face. I was like, what do you, so I just asked him, I said, "The Jew?" He said, "Yeah." He put his fist up and he said, "You are the Jew the Bible speaks of." And he just kept riding down. He said, "Look it up." And he just, right.
Yeah.
I'm like, look it up where? What are you even talking? Like, what? What am I just gonna go to the encyclopedia? Like, what?
Yeah.
I just didn't have any categories for it, and
Mm,
so I just kind of wrote it off as like some kind of Black Power
mm,
nonsense, where it's like, man, these people don't have an identity firmly and deeply rooted in Christ, so they have to take some identity that has absolutely nothing to do with them.
mhm.
So then, when this white guy at my church, when me and him go out to get coffee, and I'm thinking I'm doing pastoral,
Right.
ministry for this guy. One of the first thing that he says is, "Well, you know that you're the real Jews." Now that broke my categories. Now I
Mhm.
didn't have a category for why would a white man ever say anything like that to me? Doesn't make any sense. And now I'm like, oh, it's kind of become a crisis because I'd heard it kind of bubbling, but never done any personal research on it because it just seems so non. And if you Google um, Black Hebrew Israelites, what you get is a very stereotypical picture of what uh
Mhm.
you get somebody that's dressed up in like a Ninja Turtles or a Power
Mhm.
Rangers outfit
Mhm.
screaming at people on the street.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, this is nonsense. But now when this white guy says it, I'm like,
Mhm. To believe this.
he has no reason to believe this or to say
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
So why is he saying this to me? Is he
Mhm.
this dude is he's lost his mind. And
Mhm.
now I'm his pastor. So I'm like, dang, I really need to help him think better.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay. And he was like pushing. I was like, hey, do me a favor. If you will just not bring this up to me, give me a full year. I
Mhm.
promise you, I will look at everything. I will leave no stone unturned. So I
Mhm.
went into even looking up and thinking about us being Israelites from a more like evidentiary standpoint. I went into it trying to disprove it because I thought, oh man, this is going to hurt the church. Now
Yeah.
you even got white people believing this.
Mhm.
This is some kind of weird cult, some kind of
Yeah.
something weird is going on here. And
Mhm.
and as his pastor, I need to love him and help him by
Mhm.
lovingly dismantling
Yeah.
this and showing him kind of the places that he's gone wrong. And it was through that
Mhm.
path that I started stumbling on all this stuff, and I'm like, well, dang, I don't know what to do with this other than
Yeah.
to agree with him.
Mhm.
And we'll get to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, that's really helpful. So there was something that broke your categories and
Mhm.
that made you look beyond the surface of what you have been told to believe. And that's a lot of times when we have these beliefs that we don't actually really know why we believe what we believe. It's just
Absolutely.
been told and it's been passed down and it just kind of makes sense until something happens like this.
And that's why it's important to develop a personal epistemological process. So
Right.
if epistemology is a method by which you come to, basically, when Pontius Pilate is having a conversation with Yahusha, with Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
um, he ends with this really sad statement where he says, "What is truth?"
Mm.
But that's extremely important. And that's an
Mhm.
extremely important question that everybody has to answer.
Right.
What is truth? There is no such thing as a personal truth. Your truth is your truth. My
Right.
truth is my truth.
Mhm.
So you have to have a personalized process by which you
Mhm.
filter the information that you take in,
Yes.
and you can be able to, uh, based upon some kind of with some kind of foundation, you can say
Mhm.
this is what I believe to be true, and it's not just an opinion,
Mhm.
but something that has some kind of a foundation.
Mhm.
I liken it to this: an epistemological process is like a water filter, in that
Mm.
you put all the dirty water can go into it, right?
Mhm.
And it begins to filter down. But if you have a bad epistemological process, that water is going to kill you.
Mm.
There's no truth in it. The water is going to kill you. It's
Mm.
poisoned. But if you have a good epistemological process, then the whatever you hear on the media,
Mhm.
whatever you hear on whatever you read in a book,
Mhm.
whatever you read in a in a news article,
Mhm.
or in a academic article, for that,
Mhm.
peer reviewed academic article. How do you know those things are true? Just because
Mhm.
everybody in
Right.
that circle says it's true?
Right. What is
Um,
the filtering
so
process?
so how do you filter the information down such that
Mhm.
whatever you're drinking
Yeah.
is actually going to help you and not kill you?
Mhm.
So this is why we must develop a process by which you don't just believe just because somebody else said it or
Mhm.
somebody else believed
Right.
it or
Including
whatever,
us.
including us,
Right.
especially us. We're
Yes.
just some random people on
Right.
YouTube, you know?
Yes.
You don't know us.
And so and would you agree that this filtering process, because it is both intellectual and spiritual, it is both a um tangible, evidential process, historical evidence,
Mhm.
right? And also a leading of the spirit,
Absolutely.
and developing a process that aligns and meshes with both of those things.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
I think, if I remember correctly, when you first started your process, you first started with um, going beyond the Ninja Turtles version of what Hebrew Israelites have, what we've been told about them, and just started looking at the historical data. Um,
Well, I didn't know where to start.
really? Okay.
Where do you find information about this?
That's true.
That's
Yeah.
not from the Power Rangers.
Yes.
I knew I didn't want, you know, you know, the most high, you can sense the most high spirit, right? And I
Hmm.
knew the things that I had come across from whatever I had heard of Black Hebrew Israelites, that wasn't from the spirit of Yah. That wasn't
Absolutely.
not from, so I didn't want any information. I didn't fully, I thought the whole claim was nonsense. So I just
Hmm.
kind of wrote it off.
Hmm.
But really what I was experiencing was something didn't sit right with my spirit. And maybe it's just about them. So I knew I didn't want my
Mm.
information from them.
Yeah.
So I end up, I was on Twitter,
Okay.
and I ended up coming across this guy that calls himself a Christian rapper. I listen to a whole bunch of Christian rap. This
Hmm.
guy calls himself a Christian rapper, and he does rap battles and whatnot. And I end up having this interaction with him in the DMs on Twitter. And he was on something, and he called himself a Christian Hebrew Israelite. And I didn't think that was possible. From everything that
Hmm.
I'd heard, urban apologists talk about the Hebrew Israelites, and it's like,
Hmm.
that's like a disease that you
Hmm.
catch or something.
Hmm.
And it's and it was all the stereotypes that I had seen elsewhere as well.
Hmm.
But this guy kind of broke my category. So I DM'd him and I
Hmm.
said, "Hey, I heard you call yourself X, Y, and Z.
Hmm.
Where'd you get this from? Where'd you
Hmm.
get your information?" Because I was trying to go back
The source.
to his sources. Yeah.
Mhm.
So he sent me some YouTube videos, and I'm like,
Mm. Right.
YouTube is filled with everything. You can find anything on YouTube, good,
Yes.
bad,
Mhm.
true, false. You can
Mhm.
find any of it on YouTube. So so then, as I'm absorbing this information, how do I filter the information and begin to say, this is good information, this is bad information, this is
Mhm.
true, this is true, this is clearly false, or this is, I don't know which category to put this in. I need to set
Mhm.
this to the side and re-examine it later. So that's kind of how it started. So I got this guy
Yeah.
started sending me videos. I started looking at the videos, and as I was
Mhm.
watching the videos, I began to filter the videos through kind of my this mesh that I'd
Mhm.
create. I haven't gone through seminary,
Mhm.
and doing doctorate work, and studying, quite frankly, being taught by some solid teachers how to study the Bible.
Mm.
um this idea of collecting evidence, and creating
Mhm.
um coming to conclusions based upon evidence. I had been practicing for a really, really long time, but now I was pointing it at this new subject matter that I just assumed was completely false.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So can you tell us a little bit? Okay, so you got these this information. How do you filter through what is good information, what is not so great information? And what like were there some things that you just like how do you even filter like what do you even listen to and what do you expose yourself to? Because I'll talk about that a little later, but there were certain things that I was like, yeah, I'm gonna press pause on this one because I don't know about that. And it was a process for me as well. But yeah, let me know a little bit more of the research
Yeah.
process.
So again, in the epistemological process, what you're trying to do is you're trying to come to truth, capital T truth,
Mm-hmm.
based upon the evidence that is out there. Because if it's true, then reality is going to testify to its truth, right?
Okay.
Because there is no individualized your truth is your truth, my truth
Right.
is my truth. That's not real. That's
Mm-hmm.
nonsense, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how how do I how did I begin to filter that information?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first, it's just the gut feeling of the spirit, right?
Okay.
And that is not to be ignored. Just because that's not everything.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just live by your gut feeling, but it's not to be ignored. When you come across something, when you see something, when you hear something, and something your gut begins to say something, at least have an interaction and say, why is my gut reaction negative or my gut reaction positive? Just make an observation about that and go,
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting. Either I'm going to put it down for now, or I'm going to, and basically you start with the safest things, and then
Mm.
it's just like in biblical interpretation when we're teaching
Okay.
people how to study the Bible, and we're teaching people how to build a foundation in the scriptures. You go to the clearer scriptures first, and the clearer scriptures begin to interpret the less unclear scriptures.
I see.
You don't go to the most obscure and unclear thing and try to build a whole doctrine around whatever that unclear thing is, and
Mm.
ignore the things that are crystal clear, right?
Okay.
So you start with your foundation and you build from the
Mm.
foundation. So for me, a part of it was, um, can I find information with primary sources in it?
Mm.
People that is there. My first question was, if this is true, somebody's got to know it.
Yeah.
So is there anything out there in the world that corroborates this idea?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things that I came at one of the primary sources that I came around that I kept seeing people talk about, but I had never read myself, was the what was it called, The Extraordinary Life of Ola Uda Equiano.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And come to find out, in his book, which is it's his autobiography, so this is a primary source.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how he gets snatched from West Africa, brought over here, and people try to introduce him to the Bible and stuff. And he's like, "Oh, those are my people.
Mm-hmm.
That's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Those are my folks."
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, where did he get that from?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's again, so in the epistemological process, right? What we're doing is we're not going by the scientific method, which is test and weigh and measure and try to repeat, right?
Okay.
That's what science teaches us.
Okay.
But what we're doing is we're doing an evidentiary based method, which is,
Okay.
how do you prove something in a courtroom? A person can only get shot and killed one time. You can't repeat that. So you can't use the scientific method to prove or
Mm.
disprove whether somebody got killed by somebody. But what you can do is you can collect all the evidence around it. Maybe you can use the scientific method to collect DNA,
Mhm.
and then you have an eyewitness account, and
Mhm.
then you have his Apple Watch. He was at the exact location at the exact time, and when you begin to triangulate all of this information, you gather all the information, and the information tells a story. And then in criminal law, you have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning for me not to believe this evidence, it would actually be unreasonable. That's how someone is convicted or not convicted of murder, right?
Mm.
It's a jury has to say it's unreasonable for me not to believe that he did this or didn't do this, or that she did this or didn't do
I
this.
see this. I see.
And in civil law, it's a little bit different. In civil law, it's more likely than not that this is
Mhm.
true, and you can sue somebody. But when you're talking about criminal law and putting people in jail and those kind of things, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. So,
Mhm.
and this is what I was dealing with. At first, I was thinking this is nonsense, and I'm going to be able to, in 2 weeks, I'm going to be able to prove that this crap is not true. But then it began to, like it began to meet the burden of like a civil case in my mind. Like, dang, it feels like
Yeah.
this is more likely true than not. But I wasn't, I knew that if this was true, it was going to change the way my life went. So I didn't want to, I wanted the beyond a reasonable doubt kind of proof. So I kept
Yeah.
digging and kept pressing and kept looking and kept looking. And the evidence started to build up in such a way, DNA evidence, um, maps from the 16th and 17th century, and not maps that just some bozo came up with, but maps from the key what do you call it? Forgot what you call map making,
Yeah. I don't know.
topography or whatever.
Yeah.
But from the key people that were doing those things in their day, people that were directly employed by the King of Portugal or the King of Spain or the King of England, um, people that were professors at Cambridge, and
Okay.
I started coming across these sources that I could not just explain away. And I went, and the evidence began to become overwhelming.
Yeah. And so, and with, as you're building this evidential process, evidentiary method, um, there's a lot of information out there. There's you have these, these maps and these Cambridge studies and other primary sources, but you also have people teaching on these things. And you have can you explain a bit more about primary sources versus secondary and tertiary sources?
Yeah, thank you. So primary sources are people that were there and that saw it and that did it, and them telling you about it. So
Okay.
it was a study that somebody did, that's a primary source, or data that they collected, that's a primary source, or their autobiography or an eyewitness account, primary sources, right?
Okay.
Secondary sources are writings about primary sources.
Okay.
So, or, so if Coretta Scott King writes a biography on Martin Luther King, that's a secondary source, right?
Okay.
She saw it. She wasn't. I guess she was kind of there. So someone that is that can directly, that has some direct knowledge of the thing, but wasn't a part of the thing necessarily. And then tertiary sources are a collection of primary and secondary sources.
I see.
So mostly like the books that we read and those kind of things, even the YouTube videos that we watch, especially when we talk about doing some kind of research on something, these are primarily tertiary sources where they're collecting primary and secondary sources, and they're aggregating it together, and they're giving it to people, and they have
Okay.
their own kind of conclusion that they've come to. That's a tertiary source.
Okay.
So when you, in most books, like books that you come across, they're going to be tertiary sources. So what do you do? How do you know if a book is true? Is it just true because the publisher published it?
Right.
You know, well, you can go to the bibliography and begin to look at those books, and a lot of times those books will have other secondary sources that they've quoted, but then you can find those books, and then eventually you'll start getting to these primary sources, these people that either saw it or did it or was employed to keep the history of XYZ. And as you look at those things, then you go, oh, it begins to paint a picture.
I see.
So does that help?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'd say most of us are looking at tertiary sources.
Absolutely.
Like,
Let me say this real
yeah.
quick. So, from the theology that I come from, that I've been trained in, it's called Reformed theology, right? And there's a lot of good and a lot of, interesting about that. So that's just not even, yeah.
Yeah, another day.
But one of the things that it talks about in church history, most of the church history that I learned in seminary was garbage, hot garbage. And I knew while I was going through it, this is garbage that I'm never going to use. And I don't even know if this crap is true. But I got to check the box to get the seminary degree to go through and do whatever. But in seminary, one of the things they talked about is the age of the Enlightenment period, the 1500s, and because the 1500s and the what's called the Protestant Reformation, they go hand in hand. And what was happening in the Protestant Reformation is they started taking these ideals from the Enlightenment. And one of the chief ideals of the Enlightenment, this kind of philosophical movement that was sweeping through basically Europe, was is this idea called ad fontes, which is Latin for to the sources,
Okay.
right? And so what these theologians started doing was they said, hey, instead of just reading the Bible from Latin or having the Catholic priest read the Bible to me or explain what he read from the Bible, you're getting further and further away from the source itself. Instead of having the Catholic priest tell me what he read in the Bible or read it to me in Latin, let me learn Greek and Hebrew and try to take the sources themselves and read it from the source.
Yeah.
Ad fontes. So this was already a part of the minutia of what I knew to be important. You don't just
Mm.
believe what somebody tells you. You don't believe, and that includes the seminary professor, that includes the seminary that you went to, and that includes the whatever, your pastor and whoever else. You've got to learn how to go to the source yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as I already had that in my kind of bag.
Mm-hmm.
So now, as I'm starting to filter this new information, I'm like, let me go to the best sources that I can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, these videos are just saying a whole bunch of opinion because they're angry about, whatever they're angry about, or they, whatever's going on.
Mm-hmm.
They've come to this opinion, and they might even be able to say it good. They might even be able to
Mm-hmm.
say it smooth, but it's really just their opinion, right? But these videos, I started coming across these videos where these dudes was doing some incredible
Mm-hmm.
research
Mm-hmm.
where they're putting up on the screen. This is from John Ogilvy's book
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
This is a map, a Cambridge map from
Mm-hmm.
1747.
Yeah.
This is a ship manifest where these these Negroes were being brought from the west coast of Africa to America, and all of their names was Hebrew names, Isaac and
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah and
Mm-hmm.
Zechariah and Zephaniah.
Yeah.
So it's like so I started seeing these tertiary sources that
Mm-hmm.
were really clearly quoting and using primary and secondary sources.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, oh, and from these tertiary sources, I started finding other primary. I started basically
Yes.
building my own library, and I
Yes.
started looking online for myself, and I started ordering books myself, and I started,
Mm-hmm.
and and eventually the evidence just became
Yeah.
overwhelming.
So at the before you started talking about your research process as epistemological process,
Yeah, yeah,
um, you were saying to start with things that are safe and to stack upon that.
yeah.
And so how would you help someone and for us, when we started looking into these claims, for me, it was very much like I looked at historical data first, and then I went back to the scriptures and meshed the two.
Hmm.
And so, but even then, there was always the foundation of what do I know to be true about salvation,
Hmm.
um, and kind of building from there. So, but when it comes to the historical aspect of it, what were kind of some of those like safe things, or what was kind of like your starting place with the historical side of it, and how did you build on that?
I would start asking the question, what who has to gain from this?
Mm,
When information gets put out that says, and I started coming across thing after thing after thing, hundreds, literally more than 200 sources that were saying that the Jews of antiquity were black, right?
mm,
Not just Middle Eastern,
mhm,
but they was Negroes, wide nose, long head, big lip Negroes, look like me.
mhm, mhm,
And I was like, whoa, I literally read that in the source,
mhm,
Negroes. I mean,
mhm,
he said the source says something like, Jews, big nose,
mhm,
big lips, and a long head. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's
mhm,
me.
mhm. I remember you
so,
come home telling me that. I was like, oh my gosh.
so, so, but what was the question? I'm sorry, I lost it.
Talking about like some of those like stacking your evidence, and we were talking stacking your historical evidence.
Oh, so what were the safe
Yeah, you were
things?
talking about like how do you know what's true from
Hmm.
education?
So there was, back in, first of all, I started watching these videos, and person after person was saying something happened in the mid 1800s. In the mid, like 1850 and later, a lot of the sources begin to change. The second edition and third edition of certain historical books was just missing chunks. And when you
Mhm,
go back, you can go back on Google Reads and other places, and you can find the first and second edition of a lot of these things. And when you go back, it just so happened that the chunks that were missing were describing the Jews. And I'm like,
mhm.
that is so, first of all, that's a little weird.
Yeah,
Second of all, that's a little more than
coincidental.
coincidental
Mm-hmm.
that these sources are getting revised versions, but the first edition,
Mm-hmm.
it's saying certain one thing, and then later. So I started going back to the oldest sources, ad fontes, right? Go as
Mm-hmm.
back as far as you possibly could go.
Yeah.
And the further back that I went, the safer that I felt about it being information that doesn't have a slant about this particular topic, because all information has a slant. All
Yes.
articles, all research, all news,
Mm-hmm.
everything has a slant. But what I was, but I became more and more confident that the further back that I went, that it wasn't trying to hide who these people were.
I see.
So anything before 1850, I started to realize, okay, that's good. And even if I could go further and further and further, 1500s even better, 1600s good, 17. So so a few, and some of them were just simple maps. Like there was a map of Africa that I found from 1740, I think 1747. It was a Cambridge map. So I was like, okay, we know this is not complete nonsense because this has to be, if you're going to refute this, then you've got to refute it with the University of Cambridge with a whole bunch of smart people, right? And this Cambridge map had on the west coast of Africa the kingdom of Judah, or Ouida, and it was a Portuguese map that had been stored, I guess, stored in Cambridge. I don't know, kept in Cambridge. I'm not quite sure,
Okay.
but so it's like, huh? It's just, it wasn't like which one is safe and which one isn't. I mean, it was that, but from the safest places that I could get, it's stacking the evidence. Okay, that's interesting. Why? But I've heard. Then I went and talked to the other side. Let the other side talk to me, where I was watching these videos refuting the quote unquote black Hebrew Israelites. And they would talk about that map and like, oh, that map's nonsense. And they would give their reasons. And it wasn't really founded on anything other than they didn't want it to be true. And I'm like, well, that's weird.
That's
What?
an important piece to say, is that when you did your research, you did both sides. You were trying to understand and receive information about this claim being true, but you also took the time to research refuting the people who were refuting this claim being true.
Yeah, some of the people who are in or were in, I don't really pay attention to it at this point, but who are in or were in what's called the urban apologetics community,
Okay.
they were in some of the same thought circles that I was in. And they were, from a distance, some of these people were like miniature heroes to me. So I just kind of defaulted to, if I'm going to believe something, I'm going to default to what they believe. And there's going to have to be something compelling for me not to believe that.
Yeah.
So as I started coming across this research, some of those guys, some of those people had basically their counter arguments for some of the things that I came across. And as I'm listening to them critically, I'm hearing a whole bunch of, basically philosophical fallacies. And I'm like, oh man, I don't think the argument's just not very good.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And it's not like they, the port. So for that map, for instance,
Yeah.
they dismiss that map and say that those people are actually called Ouida, and not Judah, which is partially true. But the Portuguese, who the map was made by, they called that the kingdom of Judah. And if you know anything about your history, the Portuguese were a part of excommunicating the Jews during the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition. So the question then is, why are the Portuguese sending Negroes to the west coast of Africa, and then when they put a map up there's something called the Slave Coast, and that Slave Coast is also called the Kingdom of Judah. And the other side, the urban apologetics side, they just didn't have a good answer for it. It was basically just a whole bunch of fumbling and stumbling, and a whole bunch of what's called ad hominem attacks. An ad hominem attack is basically, you don't like what I'm saying, so instead of arguing with what I'm saying, you start making fun of me because I got funny hair or a big nose or whatever, and you get the crowd to believe you because you got the best jokes on me because I look funny or I sound funny or I'm saying something that just everybody knows is that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But you don't actually argue with the information.
Right.
And I started seeing a whole bunch of ad hominem attacks. I'm like, oh my gosh.
And that's really helpful, because as human beings, we are so prone to lead with our emotions instead of critically thinking through things. And there are people who either use these kind of attacks to arouse emotions in you, to lead you to believe something,
Right.
or that speak with authority that they actually don't have. And that was what I kind of encountered, was some of these teachers, and they would say things with like such, authority, and like they really knew what they was talking about, and they would quote thing after thing and make you feel like, oh my gosh, he really knows what he's talking about. But when you just pause, you take away the emotion and you just look at the argument was just not a good argument. It was easily what do you call it, easily dismissible.
There's a fallacy in philosophy called the appeal to authority fallacy,
Okay.
which basically means the reason I believe this is because that guy who's in authority, he said it, so it's true. And that's what a lot of the church deals with. Like my pastor said X. I remember one time I got into an argument. I don't even want to go fully into it, but I got into an argument with my family because they were, I was coming across these things in the Bible that just said something very different than whatever pastor that they were listening to. And I'm like, okay, you can either listen to your pastor or you can listen to the Bible.
Right.
I'm going to appeal to the scriptures. You can appeal to a pastor. That's called an appeal to authority fallacy.
Okay.
Anyway, so when I was going through seminary, what I started to realize was, I'm not going to say most because this is only anecdotal, but from my experience in the Christian world, a lot of these pastors, even though they're extremely educated, don't know the Bible that well. They know their particular brand of theology, and they know the top 5 counter arguments to the theology they compete with. So if you're a Calvinist, let me teach you Calvinism really thoroughly, and this is why you should believe Calvinism. And let me give you 5 reasons why Arminianism is wrong. So now when you come across people in your congregation, you can preach Calvinism. And when they say, well, I don't know, maybe Arminianism, you can give them 5 reasons why Arminianism is wrong, right? And it becomes so what I began to realize was, as I went higher and higher through seminary, I only got 1 degree. Now I'm going for my next degree, and I'm in these doctoral. I got a bachelor's degree, then I got not in Bible, but I was studying the Bible during my whole time in my bachelor's degree. Right. Then I got a master's degree in Bible, and then I'm like, okay, so to most people, I know more than most people about the Bible just off rip because of that little bit of education, right? But I started to realize in my master's degree, like there's a lot of people in this master's degree to get through, they don't really know the Bible like that for real.
Yeah.
And they're not even really obsessed with the Bible like that. When I got saved in college, I got obsessed with the Bible.
Right.
And I didn't understand why other people weren't obsessed.
Yeah.
And whatever. So then I got to my my doctoral studies, and I'm like, okay, this is the smartest of the smart. These are the people that really, really about it. They know Greek, they know Hebrew, they know how to conjugate verbs, and they know how to parse verbs, and they all these different things. And I get in there and I get in these classes, and over again, I'm like, oh, it's the same thing all over again. A lot of these cats know their theology really well and they're smart, but they don't really know the Bible like that. And they're not even really obsessed with the Bible. They're more obsessed with either, Ulrich Zwingli or, whoever else, the next person. They're obsessed with the next person, and they're not necessarily obsessed with the source itself. What's going on with that? So I began to realize all the more that appeal to authority fallacy is really not helpful. You got to do it you got to get it out the mud yourself. And that doesn't mean that you got to spend the same amount of time as everybody else, but whatever time that you have, you got to come to whatever conclusions that you come to based on your own research, based on your own digging, and not just what everybody else said.
Question. Are there any other philosophical fallacies that you can explain that may be helpful? I'm thinking there may be a term for this, but another thing that kind of lures people away from either seeking the truth for themselves or hearing something that sounds good and that aligns with them and kind of running with it is core pain points. So especially if you grew up in church or you've been hurt by the church, which many of us have. You have you especially as a Black American, you start doing this research and you figure out when you come to realize that your ancestors are in the Bible, you're like, oh my gosh, what else have I been lied to about? I've been lied to about my identity my whole life. It's such an overwhelming thing to absorb, and it's painful. And so it's a really emotional process. And sometimes we allow our emotion, we hear something that's the best lies are half truths, right?
Absolutely.
And so we hear something that's kind of true, but then it's also not. And then we kind of and then, 3 years later, you don't even believe, Jesus is the Messiah, or, you can find yourself believing something wild. And it all started with some emotional pain point. Is there some kind of technical word for that, or?
I'm sure there is. I can't think of it now. But what you're talking about, it's been a strategy used on our community for a really long time, by the way. Like, for instance, I'll give you for instance, Dr. Umar Johnson. which
Mhm.
I don't even know where his doctorate is from. That's a whole nother thing, right?
Okay.
But he's a smart dude, right? He's
Yeah.
clearly a smart dude. He's an articulate dude.
Yeah.
He seems to really love and care about black people
Yes.
specifically. So you start checking those boxes: educated,
Mhm.
articulate, cares about black people. I'm listening, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But what he does is he basically plays two truths and a lie with everybody he's talking to. So he'll say
Okay.
something absolutely true. Then he'll
Mhm.
say something else absolutely true. Then he'll say something else absolutely true. And then he'll say something else, and it's like you just assume because of the pattern he's just spitting truth. But if you don't have a tuned ear, you don't notice he just slipped a lie in that mug.
Mm.
If you got an untrained ear, or if you don't know about the particular subject that he's talking about, you don't know. He just slips in the lie. So he just
Mm.
plays two truths and a lie with you, and that's
Mm.
those are the best liars, right?
Yes. Yes.
So they gain your trust
Yes.
by playing two truths and a lie.
Got you. Yeah. And what you said was not having a trained ear.
Hmm.
And I didn't know that term, but because, I live with you, I understood, and because you're a pastor, I watching you preach for all these years, I've learned to be able to distinct when someone is saying something because it is true, or they're using an authority that they really don't have. I had learned to 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 see that. And so, but can you talk about, like, how does someone develop a trained ear when it comes to something that they know, or even something that they really don't know? Yeah.
It comes down to your epistemological process, everything that we're talking about right here.
Okay.
And at the foundation, so if we're talking about it like a water filter, right?
Okay. Yeah.
At the base, the finest filter in my epistemological process is the Bible itself, right?
Okay.
I didn't come to the conclusion that we were the Israelites based on the Bible. There's actually a whole bunch of other historical evidence that are like, whoa. But then once I took that, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that idea was, and I filtered that through the Bible, then what came out was very clear to me after
I
that,
see. I
right?
see.
So the same thing at the base of your epistemological process has to be the scriptures itself,
I
because it's
see.
going to filter out all the other remnants
Mm,
of sediment and all the other nonsense.
And when it comes to understanding the scriptures, I think a lot of times, especially if we grew up in the Bible, we think we know the scriptures when we actually don't. And
Absolutely. If you know a branch of theology, you don't
yes,
know the Bible. It's different.
yes,
The last church that
yes.
I worked at, which I won't even name, it doesn't even matter,
Yeah.
right? Good people, no beef
Mm-hmm,
with them
mm-hmm,
particularly, other
mm.
than a whole bunch of other things. Anyway,
Yeah.
but the last place that I was at, when I first arrived there, I was a new pastor. There was like 5 or 6 pastors. I was the new pastor, and they were like,
Mm-hmm,
you're as much a pastor as everybody else is.
mm-hmm,
So when you come in here, we want to hear you've got fresh eyes. You've got
mm-hmm.
fresher eyes than anybody else. So when we come into these pastoral meetings, we want you to tell us exactly what you see, because maybe we don't see it as clearly as you do because you're coming in from the outside. I said, sure. So a couple weeks go by, we come to a pastoral meeting, and they start asking me, like, what do you see? And I said, this is what I see about this church. And I said this a bunch of times before I even knew exactly what I was saying. I said the biggest observation that I make here is the people here know theology really well and the Bible not that well.
Mm.
And I
I remember you
and,
saying that.
and the analogy that I told the rest of the pastoral staff is, having played football, there's the guy that goes to the gym and he just does bench press every week, every day, and his chest is huge, his arms are huge, but he's got these skinny little chicken legs,
Mm-hmm,
right? He can't push anything.
mm-hmm,
He's not actually really that strong. He just looks
mm-hmm,
nice. And this is what I told the pastors. I said, in the same way, there's a lot of people here, good people, kind people,
mm-hmm,
nice people,
mm-hmm,
well-read people
mm-hmm.
even, and they know their theology, but they've been skipping leg day for a really long time. And that's
And
pretty obvious.
and when you say know their theology but don't know their Bible, like, what are you saying?
So for instance, you know, soteriology is the study of salvation. So they can walk you through um, you know, how someone say, or they've got good arguments as to why you should be baptized this way or that way, or how can someone be saved based
Oh.
upon. So they're using the Bible, but there's these cherry picked verses, and they don't really know it in context. They don't even, and it forms these theologies that create
Mm,
these catchphrases. Like one is for Reformed theology is like tulip. total depravity, unconditional election,
Yeah.
what is limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints, right?
Good.
That's
I was
two.
like, oh,
Yeah.
I remember.
It's been a minute, but so they know that they're tulip, right?
I
Total
see.
depravity,
Yeah. They know
unconditional
their
election.
categories.
They know their categories,
Mm-hmm.
but then you say, okay, show me that. Close your book.
Mm-hmm.
Show me in the Bible where you got that from.
Yeah.
There are some that could,
Mm-hmm.
but most that could not.
I see. And that goes back to kind of the primary, secondary, tertiary thing. Theology is kind of like taking the primary source scripture and putting it into these categories. And so people
Absolutely.
study this instead of studying the actual book.
Absolutely. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's really insightful.
Absolutely.
And
Most
yeah.
people's theology is based on the tertiary source of their pastor on a given Sunday. And they don't know how long their pastor done studied or didn't study. They don't know how many visitations their pastors had. They don't know how many weddings their pastor did, how many funerals they did, how many, they don't know what's going on in their pastor's life. So if you're depending your whole spiritual life on a dude that gets up for 45 minutes, if 45 minutes is long in some circles, right? 45 minutes is long in some circles. So you get a dude that's coming up for between 28 and 45 minutes, and that's what you're basing all your spiritual life on. Like you shouldn't feel super secure about that.
Yeah. Which that all just goes that all just goes back to like knowing your scriptures and being able to study your scriptures. Wow.
And you about to ask something?
No. I'm just making the observation that, when we're talking about how do we come, what is the research process and in the greater context of how did we come to believe that we're the people of the scriptures? It was both, like you were saying, is historical evidence, but the fine mesh filter was always the scriptures. And if you don't have a foundation in the scriptures, you are bound to believe anything. There's a verse, help me quote it. It's the verse, I think Peter says something about or Paul says something about being, if you're not rooted in something, you're just kind of tossed by the wave of the wind.
Ephesians 4, 20 something.
Okay, yeah. I'll look it up while you say whatever.
Yeah.
Moment.
When I went back, as you're looking up that Ephesians 4 verse, I'm pretty sure it's Ephesians 4, 20 something. Okay. But as I went back, I gathered all this information, and it became to me it started to become unreasonable for me to believe something other than that we were the people of the book. So I said, wait. I've got to jam all of this information through the Bible itself. So then I started to pour that information and these thoughts, ideas, whatever, through the process of the Bible itself. I literally started all the way over at Genesis chapter 1, and I was trying to get better at Hebrew anyway. So I started to memorize Hebrew. I started to memorize Genesis 1 in Hebrew, and as I started that, just did the hard process of completely starting over, right? And just filtering. There's this idea that now I'm leaning towards this being true. But if the Bible negates it, then it's wrong, and I've done something wrong earlier in my process, and I got to go back. Right? I got to restart. But if this actually comes through, and it actually filters through, then it's checked all the boxes for me.
I see.
And as I started going back into the scripture, man, I started coming across a whole bunch of stuff. There's a couple of scriptures that we wanted to read, and specifically concerning this filter that we're filtering all these things through the scriptures itself. I'll read 1 Peter 3, and then I'll let you read Ephesians 4. 1 Peter 3 that I kind of referenced a little bit earlier. But in your hearts honor Christ as Lord, as holy. I'm sorry. But in your hearts honor Christ. Where am I? Sorry, y'all. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and with respect. So, so it's just the idea that whatever you believe, be able to actually cop to it, like make sure there's some real evidence to back up what you're saying. And when you got the truth, Yahusha also says you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And when you have the truth, you don't have to be scared of the truth, right? And so and you don't have to be a jerk about being right. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and the verse that I was referring to earlier is Ephesians 4:14, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. And so basically just, you know, not wanting to be, yeah, just not wanting to be, I prayed this a lot when I was doing my research. It's just like, Lord, like, do not allow me to believe something that's not true just because it sounds
Me
true,
too.
just because I want it to be true, just because it feels good. I want to base my life on truth, on you, because you are truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, just if you don't know the scriptures and you don't have the foundation of who the Lord is, who is Yahushua, Jesus, what is salvation, what is the gospel, just those like what does it mean to be justified, some of those like foundational things from the scriptures itself. It You need that in order to filter through all the
Mm-hmm.
information. So.
Absolutely. So, just really briefly, we talked about my process in a lot of ways, but I've got I've been in seminary. I went to seminary. I My primary job for 8 hours a day. If I wanted to spend 8 hours just reading and writing and thinking, there was days that I could. There's
Right.
days that I could do that.
Right.
So I had a disproportionate amount of time to process a lot of these things. You didn't have that same amount of time.
Right.
So I come home to you, and first of all, even before that, you noticed that I'm not sleeping at night, which was part of my
Mm-hmm.
process. Some
Mm-hmm.
of this information was so crazy to me that I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I was having a tough time processing it. So, I'm not telling her
Right.
about what exactly is going on. I said, just trust me. Just
Mm-hmm.
give me a minute, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you everything. But you just gotta let me. You gotta
Mm-hmm.
let me go through this process.
Mm-hmm.
And so I finally come to you and I say, I think it's true. I think we're the people. How do you react to that? And then how do you begin to filter that through your own
Yeah.
process?
Well, I reacted to it because I had watched you wrestle with something so big that you really couldn't tell me until you were done processing it for a year. I knew that whatever was coming, it would have some significant weight to it. Also, watching you wrestle through it, also, um, with before I'd even started my research, I knew the likelihood of it being true was kind of high, because I had watched you wrestle through it for a year. And I know you, and I know words matter very much to you, and so you don't say anything without being fully convinced of it prior. Um, so, but I also knew, this is too weighty of a thing for me to just go off of what my husband just says. And so it takes me some time. It actually takes me a couple weeks of not doing anything, before I actually begin the process of researching. And I start with historical evidence, because it felt safe. It's like it's true or it's not. It's either like it's either one map's going to say it and it's not going to be that great, or it's like all 10 of these maps from all 10 of these different people say the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, since I didn't have the luxury of time, I watched different YouTube channels, and I kind of landed on the top two that resonated with my spirit, and just focused so much on the source. The YouTube person would have the source right there on the video so you can read it yourself.
Right.
And then because you had already purchased some of these books, I went back and I read some of the books, kind of like the top books that you recommended, one of them being, The Jews in Spain and Portugal. That
Mm-hmm.
was a very significant turning point for me because, I mean, as a Black American, I've always asked the question, well, who the heck were we before we got on these boats?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we were a people that,
Somebody. Yeah.
somebody. And so that book really helped bring all, just put all those connections there. I was like, man, it's too many coincidences. And even just us, coming making the process to come to Tanzania, it's like, well, the Portuguese people were over here too. So it's like all these different connecting historical evidence. And it's like, from a historical perspective, this just makes sense. This just makes sense. And it was just it was a settling, like, oh my gosh, I've been asking these questions my whole life. And now there's some real evidence to like back this up. So after seeing the historical evidence.
Just to be clear, real quick, Just because something makes sense doesn't necessarily mean that it's true.
That's true.
But if it's true, then it should make some kind of sense. There should be a thread that carries it through.
Yes.
So the first step was, well, this just makes sense. But
From a
then
historical perspective.
exactly, and then the next step is, well, but is it actually true? Go ahead, keep going.
Yes, and that's basically the next step. So
Mhm.
the next step was after coming to the conclusion, after listening to these videos, looking at these sources, and reading a couple of books, I was like, okay, this seems more likely than not. Now I need to go to the scriptures and see how this historical data aligns with what I'm reading in the scriptures. And I really had to pray. I prayed before I went to the scriptures, specifically looking for this because I was just begging the Most High to not allow me to just see something that's not really there.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing most people start with Deuteronomy 28, right?
Yeah.
Okay, 28.
Yeah.
Yeah, just make sure I
Mhm.
quoted that right.
Yeah.
And 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 when I read it, I teared up because again, it was just when we look at the history of what has happened to us and to our people, and then you read in the scriptures about these curses, the main question I kept going back to, there were a lot of similarities and a lot of things that I saw, but the main thing was, man, I just don't know another people who have lost their language, their land, their identity, their nation. It has been scattered all over the world, and it's treated it like crap no matter where you go. No matter where you go in this world. Um, I don't have an answer for anyone else that better fits this category. And we know these people are cursed because they curse themselves and when they put Yahushua on the cross. So it's like we know the curse is here. And so that right there, that idea that like there is no other people that better fits this narrative better than us. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about blessings and curses specifically, and we're going to go from the very beginning. The first time that someone gets blessed,
Mm-hmm.
is, well,
Yeah.
God blesses the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. But the first person that gets blessed is Adam and Eve,
Mm-hmm.
and then the day gets blessed.
Mm-hmm.
The Shabbat, Sabbath, the seventh day, it gets blessed. And the first person to be cursed is Cain.
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna so I went back and started like processing these blessings. Is it I had been told in church, you can't be blessed and be cursed, and that was just ingrained in me that if you come to Christ, you are blessed and you are his and you are blessed in him. You can't be blessed and be cursed. That was just ingrained in me. So I had that thing ringing off in my head. So I had to ask the question, is that true?
Mm.
So I went back to the scriptures and I'm like, well, no, that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's not true. You can absolutely be blessed. Be blessed to be an image bearer like
Mm.
Cain was. He didn't
Mm-hmm.
become less of an image bearer
Right.
after he sinned and killed Abel,
Right.
but he did get cursed. So
Mm-hmm.
now you've got a person who is blessed as an image bearer,
Mm-hmm.
but is now hampered by this curse that is now on him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a bunch of those kinds of things. And I remember when I'll say this really quickly.
Yeah.
I remember when I was when I was first learning how to read and study the Bible, the guy that was discipling me, I asked him, I read Jesus's Beatitudes, and he's like, blessed is the peacemakers, and blessed are the poor in spirit. And I'm like, why is he saying blessed? I'm like, what does he mean? I remember asking that question. What does he mean by blessed? What is he talking about? Blessed are this and blessed are that. And the explanation was, blessed is like a way of him saying like happy. And I'm like, okay, so why didn't he just say happy?
Mm-hmm.
What does he talk? And I just kind of wrote it away because I mean this guy knows way more about the Bible than I do, and I still
Mm-hmm.
love and appreciate that brother and all those kind of things. I'm not.
Yeah.
It's not a slight to him. He was repeating back to me what somebody had told him. I'm sure. But then I started going back and started tracing this theme of blessings and curses, and absolutely not. That's not what he's saying. He's just happy. He's talking about a people that have been put under a particular curse, and he's talking about the reversing of said curse. So part of the Sermon on the Mount, Yahusha is filling the okay, I won't go into it.
No, it's
Anyway.
good. No, stay tuned. That'll be the
Anyway,
next one.
but this actually leads us into landing this plane. The reason we started Melanated Truth was not an ego trip. I was yeah, it's not an ego trip. It's not
Yeah.
let's see how many followers you can get. It's not let's see how big we can grow the channel. Right now, if it stays at where it is right now, it's this is a to me this seems like a really big Bible study already. So I'm really grateful for just the people that would tune into us and listen to us and watch us right now.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of Melanated Truth is to help tune our ears into this most important primary source.
Yes.
That if we're gonna base if we this channel is for followers of Yahusha,
Mm-hmm.
Jew and Gentile alike,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Anybody can get in on
Right.
on the reality of what the scriptures say.
Mm-hmm.
But now you come to find out certain things and you realize we've been lied to by everything. So what are we going to base our lives on? And what I'm saying is what we are saying as a collective excuse me, is the Bible really is true. We've just been taught a lot of things that actually aren't there, or we've been taught things skewed based on our theological preferences that actually change the fullness of what's going on in the scripture. So if we can learn how to tune our ear to the source itself, then we can't be swayed and tossed to and fro like Ephesians 4 says. So the whole point of melanated truth is not to learn every single fact about the Bible, but to learn how the Bible interacts with itself. And as you learn the beats and rhythms and patterns, then you're just more in tune when you hear somebody say something. Go, not only does that contradict this one place in the Bible that I know, but now I know the whole flow of how Scripture works, and it doesn't. That it's like it becomes a tone out of pitch, and you begin to hear like, oh, that doesn't fit with the rest of the music. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
cool. Well, Karibu Tena, which just
Yes.
means welcome again. We're glad to have whoever, I don't know who's getting to the end of this thing, but if you've gotten to the end, we appreciate you.
Yes,
We love you.
thank you.
And and you know, s- it's been about a week since we uploaded an actual teaching, and that's because it
Mhm.
was me and Jaquel's 10-year anniversary last
Yes.
week, so we took a little bit of a break,
Yeah.
but we're gonna get back onto it. And yeah, this is Melanated Truth. My name is John,
And I'm Jaquel.
and we are so grateful that you would be with us
Yes, yes, yes.
on this journey as we look to know Christ
Mm-hmm.
and to follow Him
Yeah.
as He has exposed Himself
Yes.
in the Scriptures. So
Let us know in the comments what is helpful and any questions you may have and how we can better just serve you and the things that you would like to know here
yeah,
in this
and
channel.
if this was helpful for you, please like it. You know, I really only want this to get. Yeah, I really only want this to get to people that this will be helpful for.
Exactly.
But when you hit the little thumbs up situation, it pushes it out through the algorithm or whatever. It's going to get to who it's supposed to get to, but
Mm-hmm.
that's how you can help us if you want to. So we love you, and Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with joy and peace in believing, so that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. In Yahushua's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.